Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. I'm your host, Byron Greeley, and today I'm joined by Tom Voller, the founder of Dojo Films. Dojo Films is a content production studio that works with local remote teams. In this episode, we discuss how Dojo Films got their first client, and it's a very interesting story. And we discuss Tom's career trajectory and path and the turns that he took to get to where he is today. And we also talk about what entrepreneurs need to be successful and why asking for feedback and help within your network is a very useful and important tool. I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy the show. Hey Tom, thanks for joining me today. Before we go into the detail of what you're working on and how you got to where you are today, could you briefly introduce yourself and let us know who you are and what you do?
Sure thing. My name is Tom Voller. I'm the co-founder of Dojo Films. We're a creative video production agency. I'm based in London, UK, but the business operates globally.
Great. And now before we get into the weeds, could you explain what exactly does Dojo Films do and how does the business work?
So, we actually rebranded about 6 months ago. So we've really worked to effectively communicate what the business now is. I would say Dojo Films is a creative video production company, and we are sort of really set up to support scaling technology businesses and businesses in the events and sports space. We support businesses with content production, everything from ideation through to delivery. And we do that using a in-house production team or in-house team of producers and a global vetted network of crew. And that enables us to create globally, shoot locally, and think sustainably.
Great. And you mentioned that the freelance crews that you work with are vetted. How does that vetting process work? Is it just people apply and throughout time you get familiar with these guys and use them again, or how does that process work?
Good question. I'm not a producer, so it isn't my job to vet crew, although in the early days that was something we were involved with. Really, it does come down to the producers, I think, more than anything else. We've hired and brought in producers into the business who have experience in the world of remote production. I think that's really important because they are just used to working with people from afar, right? Working on projects where you have a crew on a location with a customer, but no FaceTime necessarily with us. And so in the vetting process, the obvious things that people would do is check out a show reel, have a conversation with the person. And, there are a lot of very good people out there who are truthful about what they do. But I think there's a lot of sort of chances as well. Or at least maybe that's a harsh thing to say. There are a lot of people who maybe don't have the right skill set for a project, but would put their name in the hat, right? And without someone actually vetting them, you don't know what you're going to end up with. So just through the sheer kind of experience and number of projects that our producing team have handled, I think they've gotten very wise to the sorts of questions that you need to ask people, and the kind of, the depth of knowledge that you would expect a person to be able to respond to. And I think going beyond that, the way that we've built our network has very much lent on word of mouth and referrals, recommendations. We do speak with other agencies or clients or individuals who might be a director or a DOP. Who did you work with on that project? Somebody else that we trust. And that obviously goes a long way.
Yeah, I'm sure. And did you plan to start this business? How did the business come about?
Yes and no. I think I set up a video production company when I was 20, 21, I think. Can't really remember. So from an early point of time, it was always like the plan, but actually that first plan didn't go to plan. And I think probably about 12 years ago, I just completely fell out of touch with video production altogether. And just going through a succession of different jobs, I just suddenly landed in a situation where an opportunity arose to set up a company, set up another video production company. But I mean, that situation literally arose. I woke up one morning, that wasn't the plan. In the afternoon, it was an idea we were thinking about, or I was thinking about moving forward with. So maybe somewhere underlying there was subconscious that it might happen again. But in terms of what a plan should look like to the average person, I would say there was no plan.
That's great. And why do you think leveraging the work of freelancers or contractors is such a great model for a business?
My experience of it is within video production, of course, but this isn't a unique, model. I think, it depends where you are in the world as to what people call it, but I've seen various articles about the gig economy, whereby people are kind of, I think there are a lot more people, sort of self-starters who want to work for themselves, have a bit more freedom. And we have seen in other areas of business how well it works. I mean, you look at something like an Uber, for example, that's pulling taxi drivers together, right? And they're technically, well, I don't know whether they are now, because I know they went through some various problems. They were freelancers. Whether they are now, maybe not. But for us, within the context of video production, there's a few things I think that make it really good. I mean, one is just the scale, geography. We have a customer who might be based in the UK, but they may have a customer in Paris, France, and they might want to shoot that. And so to have somebody who is in Paris already, who can go and shoot, saves time, one, saves money, two, cuts travel. The cost is travel mostly associated, which a byproduct of that travel being cut out is it's less carbon emissions, it's more sustainable. But also, rather than focusing too much on the negatives that you've saved, on the positive front, you're using local people, local knowledge, people who understand and speak the language, understand the culture, far better than, in my opinion, sending people from other parts of the world to kind of turn up and understand everything that's going on. So within our space, those are some of the benefits. And from a higher level perspective, in terms of running the business, we don't have the kind of the risk and the stress and the concern of, we have this camera operator on a full-time contract with us. And we've got to get 10 to 15 shoots a month that are specific to that person's skill set in order to cover their cost. We can use people who got the exact right skill set for the brief that comes in, and then pay them for the time that's required. And for a business like ours, where we work with a lot of different customers covering lots of different projects, that's really useful to bring different people to the table with different skill sets. I recognize that there are probably other businesses where if you're focusing on one very specific thing, then maybe having that team in-house is a better approach, but that's kind of how it works for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd like to unpack the origin story of Dojo Films a little bit more. In terms of, you said circumstances changed and then the business kind of happened, or you had this idea and you wanted to make it work. But how did you go about finding that first client?
In a very unconventional way, possibly, although this is amongst sort of close friends, it's a well-known story. But actually, as I've shared this with more people, I think it's actually not too dissimilar. I think there's a lot of familiarities. I mean, cut to the chase, after my first venture into video production failed miserably, in that I wasn't happy and I wasn't progressing and I wasn't making any money. I then kind of started, I guess, what you would refer to as a more normal career. You know, when I got a job in the city of London, I was working as a recruiter, and after a few years, it felt like it was time for a change, and I moved. The next step for me was actually via a candidate who I knew, who was working at another business, a South African tech company actually called VAT IT. And he sort of suggested, why don't you come and work for us in a sales capacity? And so I moved over, having come from a sort of a very, I came from the world of recruitment, but I think that the team that I was in, the business that I was operating in, did have some old school, hard sort of traditions. But longer term, I think they've served me really well. And when I went into the new role, I think I found it easy. I sort of felt that, you know, people in recruitment have a very tough gig, you know, because they can do a phenomenal job. And even if they do a phenomenal job for a client, the client doesn't want to use them again on the next one. Ideally, they hire someone for free via someone just applying. Whereas moving into sales and working for a company that has a product to sell, there are actually people that want to buy the product. And so it's more around selling its benefits over and above someone else's potentially. So yeah, I moved there, but I think because I was found it a bit easy, was maybe slightly arrogant. It ended within a year. I think I was fired. Subsequently, I, by complete coincidence, was then looking for another sales role. And I started looking at sales roles within more technology companies, and a role came up, and it was for a video tech company. And it was the first time in maybe 4 or 5 years where I suddenly thought, oh, I did used to like video, and I know something about it. So I applied for the role and got the job there. And I can't remember how long I was there, but maybe 3 years. And there were a couple of changes of ownerships, a lot of investment. Subsequently, that led to quite a bit of disagreement, and I got fired went out in a blazing row and said some things that maybe you shouldn't say in the office, and ended up at a pub across the road, you know, a few minutes later, and some of the employees who I used to work with, some of my ex-colleagues, came and joined me, and they said, you know, you should let your customers know what's happened. I think they said that specifically to me, not because it's good advice to everybody, but my role was in that, at that point, I was sort of account managing for some customers and helping them to kind of sign up new contracts to get some really good content delivered. And there were a couple of people that sided with my reasons for disagreeing with management, and they were sort of said, you know, you should at least let the customers know that you're no longer there anymore. And I did, and I called one of my customers, and they literally turned around right then and there on the spot and said, the only reason we want to sign up again is to work with you, so we're going to give you 3 days, 4 days, or whatever it might have been, to come back to us with a proposal. And so from, losing a job and going through those mixed emotions of elation and anger, then elation, then anger, then concern over now you're going to pay for your bills, to tipsy. I then suddenly was trying to work out, okay, how am I gonna start another business? And that led to a conversation with my now business partner, Sam, who at the time was already had already founded Dojo Films. It was a different type of business back then, far more similar to your kind of traditional independent video production company. And so I kind of, had a few conversations with him, and it sort of progressed, and we took on the project, and we all went with, the whole, I know that the answer, the question was how to get your first client. I mean, we sort of got the client before we had a business, if that makes sense. It wasn't the case that we set up a business and then went to find the client. It was actually, we had a client who wanted us to look after them, and that meant we got to make a business. And I think I've had a lot of conversations with people who, I think that's quite a normal thing now in hindsight. People work within a company, they learn about how the business functions, how it works, from sales, the marketing, the operations. They can see some of the pitfalls where they can make improvements. And if you're on the right side of the business, you may build good relationships with people that you can then have conversations with, and from there launch. So yeah, that's how it happened for us.
That's a great story. And in terms of taking on that first client, was it just like a make or break situation and you were like, okay, I'm just going to wing it and make sure that this works out? Or did you have some self-confidence based on your previous experience that you could deliver for this client?
A bit of both. I mean, you can never be fully confident, I don't think. And, with something you haven't done, I think I inherently am someone who sort of says yes. I don't. There's a businessman, entrepreneur, whatever who comes to mind for me. It's Richard Branson. I don't actually think I'm a fan of his. Not really. I don't think I've ever kind of aspired to follow him or whatever. But I do know that there's a few things that he said, and he's an entrepreneur that's always said, always say yes. Say that you can do it. Say you can take it on and work it out afterwards. Just get the business and then work it out. And I think that is definitely how I've kind of operated. And I think, when this came about, it was sort of, I wasn't running. I wasn't a producer. I wasn't in the weeds of running the project. But I just felt that like we can work it out. I mean, how hard can it be? Let's just do it. And there were a few obstacles that got thrown at us. When we tried to get it set up. Not least the fact that the company I'd worked for got whiff of what was happening and tried to sue us. Although, being recorded here, but we didn't do anything that was outside, that wasn't allowed. It was the customer was soliciting business from us, and we responded, and we went about it in a very professional way, I think. But we had no idea. I do remember, took a lot of convincing from my business partner to agree to take the project on. And I can completely understand that. You've got someone, getting thrown out of their office in a ball of fire, going into the pub and then saying that they've got this great idea to work with these new clients, and don't worry about it. It's easy, even if it was shooting in 15 different countries.
Wow. And I feel like many people think that they need quite a bit of investment to start a business. Did you take on any investment to start Dojo? And also, what's your view on people's perception of investment?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I'm fortunate in that I don't think there's ever been a time in my life when I've had to, when I've really got, when I've ever had to properly consider whether I can say yes and what the worst case consequences might be. And I say that because I've had, been lucky to have very supportive parents who, at the end of the day, whatever happens, I can go and sleep at their house and get fed. And I know that isn't necessarily the case for everyone, but other than that, which I accept may be a relatively big thing or not, but beyond that, in terms of the actual, getting cash to run the business, when I first did Wild Lion Media, which was when I was sort of 21, I thought that that's what you did need. And I convinced myself and my family and the bank at the time that I needed the best computer, the best computer screen, the best camera. I needed 3 different lenses just in case a job came in. And I also needed, at the time, a year-long tenancy on a 4-person office because I was going to grow and have 3 other people. And I needed a company car. And lo and behold, I borrowed a whole load of money, didn't really get much work, and it all failed. Dojo Films, looking back on it now, I think one of the best things we did actually, and something I still kind of weirdly admire myself at the time of doing it, is that we didn't go down to the route, even though it might have made a hell of a lot more sense. Like we were adults, we had a client, we knew what was going on, so actually going to borrow money probably would have worked. But we took the route that we didn't want to borrow money, and I don't think we ever necessarily had the conversation either. What we were quite clever. We were outsourcing. Now the business has producers in-house, but back then couldn't afford to hire a producer on the basis that we had one client. So everything we did, we were working with freelancers. Like literally absolutely every single part of the business was just, paying people by the hour. And the only people we would pay would be people who are related to a job that we had. I didn't even have a computer. I literally didn't have a computer for the first 2 to 3 months to business. And Sam was working in the basement of a student basement underneath a university in central London. And I would go there and sit next to him during the day and kind of look at his computer screen whilst we did stuff. But I think what we did was we'd really work on getting a deal over the line, and at the end of the day, you gotta sell a dream, sell an idea, or whatever, or sell a product or a service, whatever it might be. And then we offered, in the early days, our customers quite heavy discounting on their projects if they paid in full upfront, and that bankrolled the business basically. So, I think our first project was with Iron Man. It was a big job. It was covering multiple events across Europe for a period of about 3 months. But we said to them that it's April, we've got a race in 2 weeks, and there's another one in October. But if you can pay us all of that money now, it's X amount cheaper. And they agreed, and so that kind of helped us a lot. And then we did that for the next 2, 3, 4 customers as well. And that enabled us to kind of, enabled me to go and buy a laptop, and then pay for some software to manage the projects that we were working on. But, when it first started, it was literally, Google Docs, Google Excel, an email account. It cost you a tenner and fine. But yeah, it was pretty raw. And I would say to most other people as well that, starters, if you want to start something, don't don't hold back because you don't have all the things that you think you need initially. Because actually, all you actually need is a customer to sign a contract. That's actually all you need to get going. You just need a commitment that someone is going to pay you some money to do something. And so get to that point as fast as possible and then work it out afterwards.
Quick interruption from me. The podcast has been growing and I'm really, really happy and really, really proud. But none of that would have been possible without your support. So I really thank you for that. And if I could just ask if you could continue your support and follow the podcast on your podcast listening app or subscribe to the YouTube channel and like or comment on the video. These little actions mean a lot and really help with the growth. So thanks in advance. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for your continued support. I really appreciate it. Back to the episode. Yeah, I agree. And so you basically experienced both sides. You started your own business, but you also worked a 9-to-5 for a period of time. So you were surrounded by both types of people. Why do you think many people are so fearful of starting their own business?
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? I feel like, the big one is just like the risk. I think everyone sees it as it's a risk, the lack of security. What happens if it doesn't work? What happens if I don't bring any money in, et cetera, et cetera? But in a funny sort of way, I think I've been fortunate in that regard to have been fired twice, because by getting fired, what happened very soon afterwards is I got another job, and you very quickly realise that actually, like, nothing happened. Like, my life carried on. I accept that there's going to be certain times, certain types of roles where maybe it can be tough. You lose a job and you don't get paid for weeks or months, fine. But I think if you're someone who's thinking about starting a business because you were on and you think quite a lot on how to do it better, I mean, you're probably already kind of quite a long way away. You're probably pretty valuable as a member of staff to somebody else in the industry already, right? So your risk is probably fairly limited. You could just go and get a job at another similar company if it doesn't work out. But yeah, I think that's probably like the big one. People kind of see it as like this big sort of stepping stone. But I kind of look at it and just think it was a whole load of people who've been conditioned into thinking that the right thing to do is to work for other people. But I'm like, why on earth would anyone want to work for somebody else? Why are you getting up in the morning and you're working 1.5 times harder than you maybe should or could be? You're not getting 50% extra reward for that. Somebody else's. What is? I don't know. It's a kind of it's easy to say once you've been on the other side, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think security has got to be probably the main reason.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you touched on with the conditioning thing, I've heard another founder describe it being more risky than being in complete control of how much you can make. Having your income capped at a certain level and also having the possibility of being fired is actually, he sees it as more risky than you being in complete control of how much money you can make and how many clients you take on.
Yeah, I mean, look, right now, there's news every single day about businesses announcing further job cuts. I mean, there's a company in the UK, John Lewis, major retailer that everybody loves and trusts. And if you were a member of staff there, an employee, you become a partner. You get percentage of profits. But they've announced the other day, they actually announced about 6 weeks ago that they're changing their I can't remember what it's called, the leave that you get if they put redundancy package. For every year that you've worked with a business, you would get given 2 weeks of pay if you're made redundant. They announced 2 months ago they're cutting that from 2 weeks to 1 week. And then last week, they announced they're going to get rid of 1,500 people. I don't know how many people, if there's 1,500, have been there less than a year, but they're gonna get called into a meeting, and in a week they're not going to get any pay. In 3 weeks max, maybe a week, maybe 2, they're gonna have to pay their rent. To your point, I mean that's crazy. Whereas in my position, I mean, winter is always pretty tough for us. It's been the last couple of months is always this time of year is tough on revenue. But at least I know what's coming. There isn't a risk of me tomorrow telling myself, no, I've got no job. But I mean,
Yeah.
I can drive the business into a hole and kill my job off, sure. But it could happen overnight, I guess. But yeah, to your point, I think I think the other way is, risk it. I think you kind of sit there and go, I'm in the peak of my powers and doing amazingly well in this particular role, and I'm not benefiting from it. But yeah, I guess, it depends what business you're in. There are obviously some slightly different setups, I guess, that reward employees maybe more, but yeah, it's a good question.
And from what we've touched on of our conversation, it doesn't seem like your career path has been a linear one. But how do you view university from a hiring perspective?
On the one hand, I would say it's kind of irrelevant. And we have hired people, and what we have been looking for when we've hired people is their ability to do the job that we want. But being a small business that wants to grow, we also, we really want to bring in, we're looking for people who, I don't know, demonstrate some sort of drive, ambition, some gumption, the proactiveness. People that want to say, okay, I get this is my job, but I'm going to go and do some other stuff and take it further. Vibe. That kind of doesn't come from a university background. It doesn't mean people who go to university don't have it, or people that don't go have it. It's just that comes from meeting people, and we've met people and been sort of like, they don't have it. We're not engaged. Lack of common sense. I mean, you can meet people who are on paper incredibly intelligent, but they're incredibly intelligent on paper because they've spent thousands of hours revising and prepping for an exam. Put them on the spot in a situation where they've got 3 minutes to respond and they've not dealt with it before, and they're awful. So, I don't think there's a direct correlation. At the same time, I do think there is still a kind of, not necessarily with every university, but there are a set of universities, I guess, and a set of types of degrees that people have done that you can kind of say with a fair amount of accuracy that these people are going to be pretty intelligent and on it, and and so yes, you can. There's an element of that which is, well, that's really cool, but I don't think that means, if we were to meet two people side by side and one had their sort of university on paper and the other didn't, I mean, if they were like exactly the same, maybe I lean toward, I may as well get the university degree as well, maybe. But the reality is, just going to take the person that you get on with best, the one that you really feel is a right, and I don't think it's as big a thing necessarily. But then I'm saying that from video production, from creative. I think if you were to go to a hospital or a law firm and ask them, I think they'd say something. I think they'd say it's probably pretty important, because otherwise, how on earth have you learned anything about this particular industry? So yeah, it's
that
dependent
makes sense
on that.
And so you've described throughout your career that you've had a few setbacks, like you got fired from a few jobs, and you closed down one business and pivoted into recruitment and then sales. Like starting again and reinventing yourself, did that impact your mental health at all?
Yes, but positively, which maybe isn't the expectation. I think it was rather the reverse. I think it was everything prior to that where I really suffered because wasn't in the right job, didn't have control of certain things, maybe didn't have people in the business or above me who were necessarily the best leaders either, or motivators, or best support. And so actually it was only kind of once I got back into sort of dojo, I guess, that these sorts of setbacks and things actually start, they kind of build you up again. You know, they kind of build strength, build resilience, build confidence more than anything else. I mean, we launched the dojo, I think it was sort of like February or March 2019 when the opportunity to work with Ironman came up. And when technically the Ironman contract was signed by Dojo Films, but Sam's Dojo Films. We ran that project as me as a consultant for 6 months. And after that, we proved that worked. That was when together we actually went and formed a new limited company called Dojo Films, and became, equal business partners and kind of ran with the idea. And that was October 2019. In February 2020, unless you were living in a hole somewhere, you all know what happens. COVID hit. And so, we were killed again, basically. And in the UK, we were directors of a limited company, which meant there was no furlough, there was no freelance payouts, there was nothing. So I lived with my parents for a few months, and we pivoted the business somewhat. And, we recognized, okay, we need to change the industries that we're targeting. We've moved from sports to technology. And we also recognized that live action content was going to be difficult, or it was going to take a while to come back. So we focused on animation. We then managed, I think the first big customer we got was a US firm called Quantum Metric. Out of COVID. They were a fantastic customer. They gave us the opportunity to do lots of new things that we hadn't done. And in a way, they helped sort of build Dojo back, really. They gave us, we did the work and we did it incredibly well, and they were very happy with it. But they gave us a real opportunity to build a portfolio. We've done 30 to 40 projects with them. And then all of a sudden, despite the fact that every single person in that business absolutely loved us, they got so big that they needed to hire an in-house team. The in-house team came in and they just decided, I won't name them, but a couple of them came in and they just decided we must be better than anyone else that's possibly existing out there. So we're not even going to bother with the courtesy of letting them know that we're not going to call you ever again or speak to you. So, we went from, and we'd had other customers, but we literally had like the best customer, all the best feedback, and that was just poured under our feet. It kind of felt like COVID had happened again. But then we went out and there were some other customers and found a new one. And last, I think in what year it is, 2024, 2022, our biggest customer is probably worth about 30% of our sort of revenue. In 2023, they dropped, probably worth about 10 to 15%. And this year they may drop even further. So you're kind of always, in some way, having knockbacks, I guess, is one way of putting it. But the other way of putting it, I think, is you're just developing and evolving. And I guess, growing a business isn't, I'm trying to think of an analogy that isn't awful. The one I'm coming to mind is, it's not like running around the track. It's running around the track and doing the hurdles at the same time. That's kind of, things come up. But they're in front of it. It's not that these are big things and they're awful. They're like, you're going to have obstacles and you've got to know that that's going to come, and that's all part of moving forward.
I think that's such an important perspective, because a lot of people have that sort of victimhood mentality. When setbacks like that happen to them, they blame external factors and aren't introspective and realize, like you realize, that maybe those roles weren't best for you and you sort of heading in the right direction. Whereas when you sort of unload all responsibility, you don't really look internally and take steps into the path that you're meant to be going on, and life just sort of happens to you in a way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And that's, I think the time in recruitment, I think, really helped with that. It was a role, and sales, I think, helps. Because for a long time, I mean, my first day in the recruitment firm was, I went through the whole interview process, like, oh, you're going to get loads of training. It's going to be 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to help you get up to speed and tell you all the ropes. You arrive, and then like, there's your desk, there's a phone, call these people. I'm like, so say what? I've never called anyone. Like, this is terrifying. And you're going to watch me do it as well. No, thanks. But they're like, do it. And anyway, fast forward, but recruitment and a lot of sales roles are literally, or at least pre-COVID, where I pick the phone up, pick the phone up, pick the phone up, pick the phone up. And in recruitment, more so than any other industry that I'm aware of, you get a lot of rejection. You can make 90 phone calls in a day, and 85 people do not want to speak to you. In fact, your happiest moment of the day might be a voicemail that you get through to, right? And you get to leave a message. But I think that that process of facing rejection over and over and over and over, I think that does help, because that's it's not just the same as running a business, but I think lots of people but I don't know if it only exists in the sort of creative world, but if you're an author or a poet or an artist, you're constantly having to put your work on display and seek validation or get some kind of like acceptance, in order to sell it, I guess. And so more often than not, you get told no. It's very unlikely you're ever going to just cut up with something and walk into a room and say, hey, do you want to do this? And they go, yeah, sure. I mean, you help. So that's, I think if you're quick to kind of down tools, then you're going to fail. What I think we did, well, certainly what I did, and I think Sam, I've mentioned this once or twice to Sam. There was a partnership that we had early on in Dojo that we really valued, and we kind of went all in. We did everything for these people, then they kind of ditched us. And I think internally, neither of us ever forgot that. But they then became our evil, like, I don't know what you would want. I'm trying to think of like our enemy or something. Like, we just had to prove them wrong. So rather than giving up, kind of channeled that energy into a sort of a drive to go and say, okay, you don't think we're right for you? Well, we're going to prove that you've made a mistake. And I think we might have done that, maybe, but they probably don't care. But I don't care either. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the important part. It's not necessarily whether they care or not. It's how you channel that energy to be productive rather than a victim and try to figure out why they didn't carry on working with you. It's like, okay, we'll show them. And then it's productive energy rather than just like the company could implode because you think, oh, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned COVID, and I can imagine that being a substantial hurdle in the business. But are there any other hurdles that come to mind throughout running Dojo Films?
I probably, I can't think of any right now off the top of my head, but I think they're frequent. There's, you just can't be sure of what the next thing is going to be. I mean, fortunately, in touch wood, it doesn't happen again. And I don't think we haven't had anything that's been as kind of as bad as COVID. And that really was terrible.
Yeah.
And like I said, we've had clients that we've lost. That's probably the next biggest one. It's you get very vested in your customers. And I think one of the things I've learned is you've got to be very careful to not be fooled, not by the customer, but not be fooled by yourself into thinking that customers are then your friends. Because we have some very good relationships with a lot of customers, and a lot of those customers have stopped using us. And it's not because they suddenly decided they didn't like us, but for business decisions, they've done other things. And maybe in our early days, that was something we didn't recognize. It felt very personal. more recently, we've had a couple of customers whereby, they were spending huge amounts of money and committing every single quarter, and we started to kind of forecast revenue based on their spend, and then one day, bang, their entire budget just got cut. It wasn't reduced; it was cut from literally everything to nothing overnight. That was a killer, but it wasn't because they've chosen to go with somebody else. We still have a relationship with them. We still speak to them. I still went for coffee with them not that long ago. They just don't have money to spend in this area that they used to spend money in. So these things come up a lot, and they do hurt the business. And I think the biggest thing we've worked out is the bigger you get, the more you grow. The larger your overheads, the bigger your staff, the harder the hit can be. The tougher it is. I think, year one, COVID happened, but I can't really recall being like, maybe we were all stressed, but I don't remember sort of feeling not being able to go to sleep or wake up in the mornings. Whereas now, when certain things happen, you've got a team to think about. You've got other people who are, we on a month by month basis, we probably have 20 to 30 different freelancers that we're working with who need to get paid on things. So kind of it's a different kind of concern or worry or obstacles now. And maybe those obstacles are much smaller, mini hurdle things to go through, but they are more apparent and more frequent.
And have you always seen yourself as an entrepreneur?
No, absolutely not. I think I've just probably been, I don't know what I've assumed. I mean, certainly not that. I think I've just always felt that I didn't want to do what I was told to do by everyone because people are stupid. That might have been my mindset in certain scenarios, when that's in a way it's only, I'm not saying this is good advice to people, but in the roles where I felt I'm being asked to do something that doesn't make sense anymore, I think I could do it better, or they're not listening to me, or I would say and I would argue and end up falling out and getting fired. I mean, it literally happened twice. And for me, I'm certainly not saying that the way in which I went about it was necessarily the best approach, but it led to where I am now. And I think I look at what I'm doing now and what Dojo is, and I think, well, that's kind of validation. Like, we're doing it better. We're more profitable. We're bigger. We're having more fun. I'm in control. I
think that is quite an inherent trait in entrepreneurs, is not really being able to listen to authority and always feeling like you could do it better. What do you think is the one thing that all entrepreneurs need to have?
I mean, to your point, I think yes, there's something maybe that's a familiarity in terms of conforming, but I think the success, the entrepreneurs who are successful, my definition of successful is that they are just running a business which is sustainable. So it's not like heavily in debt or whatever. It's just like a sustainable business that's managed well, I guess. I think actually one of the traits they all seem to have is that they seek advice and guidance from good people who know more than them, and actually build teams that have people that have the skill sets in the right areas. I mean, I think the only way really I think we're going to succeed is, Sam and I very early on recognized that whilst we both understood video, we both kind of understood production. When we were the Iron Man project, Sam and I were basically the producers. We were briefing the crews, we were telling them what to do, and mostly what was happening there was a whole load of things that we weren't doing because we weren't properly good producers. And the first thing we recognized is if Dojo is going to be anything, we need to have a bloody good head of production. And we knew someone, Sophie, and we went and poached her. She's our head of production. She's actually a stakeholder in the business now as well. That's something that we don't really sort of talk about much. We're not really sure why, but she is. So she's massive. She's of huge value to the business and importance, and is involved in lots of these kind of decision-making processes. But, she knows everything about that. And so she can push back and she can take control of that. And I think that's kind of, ideally we do more than that. We had a couple of mentors as well. We don't have a regular mentor, but we've, over the years, we've reached out to find mentors, sounding boards, people that have experience who you can kind of bounce ideas off. They can very quickly tell you if you're about to make a bunch of mistakes that you could avoid by doing X or Y. Like, great, some advice you listen to and some you don't. But so I think actually that willingness to listen to other people, take on good advice, is a trait, I would say, with those that are actually pretty successful. And delegate. Get if you're not good at something, get someone else to do it.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Early days, right? In which case you just got to do it yourself, right? But
yeah,
that won't last.
I think
forever. You'll get found out pretty quickly.
Definitely. I think that's something I'm personally working on. I feel like I'm able to take on advice, but I'm lacking I don't know if it's confidence / initiative to ask for advice, because I think most people are willing to give you 5 minutes and they'll happily give you advice, but it's the ask that I struggle with. Whereas you can tell me anything about anything I'm working on and I'll happily take it on board and then, decide whether it's valuable or not. But it's that ask, and I'm just working on that at the moment. But
it's a really good point, and it's something that I've noticed in people. I mean, I don't actually know, but have you been in a sales background before at all, or exposed to that kind of side? Because I've always noticed the thing that people in the sort of the creative or the operations side of companies or finance do lack that bit of confidence just to do something that is seemingly so massive, but actually yet tiny thing. Like you say, it's just ask someone, they'll just give you the answer. Like, the person that you are asking isn't thinking in their mind, who's this person over there who's thinking about asking me a question, but they're not asking me a question. Why do they get on with asking me? They're just not even thinking about it. And I think there's a mindset that you develop with the rejection thing, which is, to my point, is it actually builds confidence, because once you realize that individually people don't care, it's just en masse, it's just a normal thing. And once you realize that the worst thing that can happen is people saying no, you stop worrying about people saying no. And I think, there's one kind of an analogy to all of this, which is, I can't remember where I saw it, but someone might have been on a podcast recently, and someone was talking about what people value and what people look at in terms of other people's successes, and they focus on the one thing that they were successful at. Or if it's like, if he jumped over something, that's the thing that everyone focuses on. No one focuses on the fact that they fell over 90 times beforehand and then jumped over. So the thing that you should all be focusing on is actually the fact that, like, this person fell over and got themselves back up. That's the bit that's actually important, and everyone's done that. There was another thing I was watching where someone was pointing out that, you might have lost someone in your family, you grieved someone, you have probably been in a relationship that ended. You might have injured yourself, you might have been in a sports team and then you weren't in the team. There's all of these things that have happened to all of us in other parts of our life that we've dealt with and overcome, and we're not dead. So. But a lot of it gets dismissed and forgotten about. But actually, it's the world of business is not this kind of mystical world where there's just like it's not like Harry Potter where some of us speak snake tongue and no one else does. We're all speaking the same language, and it's all pretty bloody simple, basic stuff. It's just that people are putting themselves out there, I guess. But I don't really think there's anything inherently different. Often I meet a lot of people that are running businesses and think this person's a complete idiot. And maybe people think that of me. But fine, if that's their motivation for going and I can do this better, go and do it. It's just, we're all in the same. We all live in the same world.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't have any background in sales, and so that is something I'm constantly working on. Is getting the no's, putting in those reps, asking more frequently.
Yeah.
Because that is the only way to become accustomed to it. Like you said, there is no other way. So I'm just trying to...
You've asked a lot of questions in the last 58 minutes, haven't you? So
true.
You're running a podcast of speaking to people and asking them all questions now. So I mean, like seems like you're doing it already. So if you hadn't clocked that much, then maybe you should just for 1 second recognize what you're actually doing.
Yeah, that is true. And before we end, I usually hand over the mic and ask my guests if they have a question for me.
Interesting. Well, I mean, what do you want to do? Like, I feel like I could be wrong, so I don't want to put those words in, but I feel like there must be an idea, or you've had ideas about doing something on your own potentially. I mean, have you?
Yes.
What is that?
So I've toyed with many ideas, but the intention is to start and run my own thing. And like this podcast could be one of those. Well, I am doing it, but in terms of monetization, it could be an avenue. So the podcast is one thing, and then there's like a course business that I'm working on with a friend. And so there are things that I'm pursuing, but like you said, or you've mentioned in our chat, I need to refine or shorten the validation process, because the wheels could feel like they're turning, but if I'm not making actual genuine progress, then it's really all for nothing. And so I'm just working on that sort of mindset shift where I know I want to be my own boss. I want to start my own companies, but I need to constantly remind myself whether this is something that just feels like progress and I feel like I'm working hard when it's not real work that has a real outcome, or whether I'm doing the stuff that will lead to something real and genuine, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, maybe this in some way seems counterintuitive to the whole podcast about just do it. But I tried, and not that I'm the only person, right, but I tried Wildlife Media, and I didn't know anything about running a business. I didn't really know anything about sales. I knew nothing about marketing. I knew how to make a video, but I wasn't very good at filming, and I wasn't very good at editing. So I kind of set up a company and sort of got by creating very average pieces of content. And I kept doing it for 3 years, I guess, to give myself some credit. But the reality is, at the end of it, the reason why I didn't progress any further is because I couldn't train myself, or had no one to learn from and to improve any of the skills within video. And I also had absolutely no one to sort of lean on or develop me in terms of the business. Nor did I have any clue, what any of it meant or anything. And so when I did eventually leave, and I didn't leave to go and get experience to start a business again, I left because it was just gone to shit and I needed a job, and my mental health had taken a battering, and my other friends had jobs and I didn't, etc. But then going into finance, learning sales. Okay, this is a good way to do it. This is kind of the approach. This is even just learning that it's okay to ask people, do you want to buy my product?
Yeah.
Like building the confidence. Then going into another business, and I didn't work in anything other than sales and account manager really, but got exposure, got a bit of a feel for like how businesses market, got given a sales deck by a head of sales, and this is a sales deck, interesting. Start doing account management. You learn, you start picking these things up, and then at some point, then to go into Dojo, it's like, okay, this is not actually scary whatsoever, because I think we understand how a business operates and we can learn. And also on the video side, we're just going to use freelancers who are actually good. That solves that problem. And so you can go into it with a whole lot more confidence. So I think it is important, obviously. Yeah, I was about to give a thing, some people talk about procrastination like kills ideas off. If you ever think and overthink, what you've got to do is just make your first step,
Yeah.
whatever it is, just make an action, and action leads to action. Um, so go to an event. I think you guys in Cape Town, you've got the Africa Tech Festival. I went to it in November. Amazing. It's like 10,000 people at the CCICC, or whatever it's called. In Cape Town. And I went with my business partner last year. Loved it. And you just walk in the door, there's a vibe. Everyone's there. You've got founders pitching. You've got people, big businesses that are international. You've also just got a dude walking around and pitching his idea. And, you get really it's a good place to go and associate yourself with other people and learn from, just start talking. It might not be for everyone to go and get a few years experience in another business, but obviously hang out with some other people, you can bounce your idea and talk it through. And if you realize actually this is a really poor idea, then don't go and ruin your life trying to, sell something that's never actually going to work. But if you've got a bit of belief and there's a bit of feedback that this has got potential, then that's all you need. I think it was my last thing I'd say, because it's a quote I read the other day, which I loved, and it's Barack Obama. And he says, there is no such thing as perfection. And it was in response to a question he got asked about how he made decisions on difficult things. And he basically said, as soon as I got to 51%, I went with it. That's it. That's the best you're ever going to get. Just get to 51%.
Wow.
Which I think is pretty good. If you try and go any further than that, you won't, because for every good reason you find to do it, you'll find another one that'll be, no, I shouldn't. So perfection doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it. Thank you for that advice, Tom. And thanks for joining me today and sharing your journey. Before we go, if people want to find out more about you and Dojo Films, where can they do so?
At the moment, website is the best place to go for our business. www.dojofilms.co.uk. But actually pretty much, I'd say almost exclusively in terms of where we communicate, where we engage with our audience and customers is on LinkedIn. That's both myself and my business partner, Sam. We're both very active. I'm literally on LinkedIn more than I am WhatsApp. We're kind of sharing our opinions on things and insights and projects and whatever on there on an almost daily basis.
Awesome. Thanks for your time, Tom. Chat soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.